The key to life is living your life with intention. That means you got to do the work. You got to write down your values. You got to have 1, 3, and 5 year goals written down across all aspects of your life. Live your life with intention. Know who you are, know why you're here, and figure out what you want to do. Write it down. Otherwise, it's just wishes, hopes, and dreams.
You're listening to What Fuels You, where we deep dive with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders to learn more about their stories and uncover nuggets of wisdom we can all use. I'm your host, Shauna Swerland, CEO of Fuel Talent, an award-winning recruiting firm based in Seattle. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Howard Behar. Howard's career in business spans over 50 years, all in consumer-oriented businesses covering several industries. He retired from Starbucks Coffee after 21 years, where he led both the domestic business as president of North America and was the founding president of Starbucks International. During his tenure, he participated in the growth of the company from 28 stores to over 15,000 spanning 5 continents. He served on the Starbucks board of directors for over 12 years before retiring. Howard is currently a trustee for the Sheri and Les Biller Family Foundation and is on the advisory board of Anthos Capital. He is committed to the development and education of our future leaders and has been a longtime advocate of the servant leadership model. He has also authored 2 books on leadership titled It's Not About the Coffee and The Magic Cup. Welcome, Howard. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, Shauna. I appreciate it.
Of course. Good to see you. Okay. So first, I'm curious. I know you've traveled the world. What is your favorite city?
Tokyo.
Oh, I love Tokyo also. Biggest pet peeve?
Biggest pet peeve, people that don't listen.
Favorite era?
Favorite era, the 40s.
What is currently keeping you up at night?
Being 80 years old and realizing there's a shorter time period left.
Yeah.
And Trump.
Yeah. Is there some sort of like something you've always wanted to do, like an itch that you've wanted to scratch, but you haven't, as far as like pursuing a certain skill or talent or experience in your life?
There's tons of them, but I don't have anything that I say, gee, I have to get it done. I've done a lot. I've traveled to 50 some countries in my life. I've done lots of great things. I want to spend my time nurturing and inspiring the human spirit. That's what I try to do. So that's the itch I want to scratch, is keep trying to help people and serve people. That's what I enjoy. That's where I get my juice.
Yeah. I love it. Is there something that, like an attribute or anything in the world that impresses you?
Kindness. There's an old saying, in a world where you can be anything, be kind. And we don't have enough kindness right now.
I agree. Okay. And what about, final question? Do you have a guilty pleasure?
A guilty pleasure, Scotch, single malt Scotch.
What kind? I'm going to write it
I
down.
like a Macallan 18.
Okay. So you're a fellow Seattleite like me. You were raised here. Tell me about your upbringing here. I know you had a Sephardic dad and your mom was Ashkenazi.
Well, they're both, my parents were both immigrants. So I'm first generation. My dad actually left his family in 1910. He had a brother in Vancouver, but he had 6 other brothers and sisters and his parents in Bulgaria. And he left them and came to Seattle and worked in the Pike Place Market when just after it opened. Couldn't speak the language, spoke Ladino and Bulgarian. Went to Broadway High School, which was now the Broadway Community or the Seattle Community College, and to learn the language, and opened a small mom and pop grocery store. That's how I grew up. And my mom came from Latvia in about 19 as an 8-year-old, and she was from 13 brothers and sisters. 11 made them to the United States when she was the baby of the family.
Incredible. And how did they meet?
I don't know. My dad was probably looking to get married. He was like 30 some years old. My mother was 18, and they ended up getting married, and the Jewish drum beats.
Yeah.
And how they got introduced. They ended up getting married, which unusual for a Sephardic to marry an Ashkenazi at the time.
Yeah. At the time it was a big deal. I know. That's interesting. So for people who don't know, you can explain like where Sephardic
Well, Sephardic
heritage comes
come from
from.
around the Mediterranean, basically from Spain. I mean, that's where we think about it. Spain, Greece, Turkey, all around the Mediterranean. The Ashkenazi came from Northern Europe.
Yeah.
So they had same kind of traditions, maybe different foods, but
Yeah,
basically
they get to eat different foods on Passover, I think. And so tell me about the grocery store growing up. Did you work there and do you have siblings?
no, well, I have siblings. My sister was 14 years old, Beverly Schoenfeld. She passed away about 4 years ago now. My brother is 10 years older, he's still alive. So I'm 80 and he's 90. And so I really didn't work in the grocery store. I was, my dad was 50 when I was born. So he was retired by the time I was really old enough to work. Although I was in the grocery store every day after school, sweeping the floor, doing something like that, but not really working. But I watched my dad work really hard. Get up in the morning at 4 o'clock, go down to Produce Row, which was on Western Avenue, get the produce and fruit and bring it back to the store, clean it up, open the store at 8 o'clock, close it down at 6, come home, eat dinner in 11 seconds, and fall asleep in his chair.
Yes. And then same thing again the next day.
Yeah, the same thing again the next day. Just the way that it was. My parents worked together. My mom worked in the grocery store, and so. But
Yeah.
the biggest influence is, I think, he was a huge influence because of how he treated what we call customers. He saw them as his friends and his neighbors, and it made a huge difference. He was a
Yeah.
very he was a very giving guy.
Yeah. And so if you had to say, we all look back and say, this is what mattered to my family at the time, could you pull those things out of like what were the values in the home?
Family. It was all about family. My mother still had 8 or 9 brothers and sisters that were alive as she was living here in Seattle, and her parents had come here. And so my dad, we didn't have much of a family. He had a brother, but we weren't so involved. But on my mother's side, which was the Bender side, we were totally involved. On Saturday night, Friday or Saturday nights, we were always in an aunt or uncle's house for dinner, And so my mother's best friends were her brothers and sisters. And
That's
so
so fun.
that
And what were you into in high school? Like, were you into sports, not music? We talked about that. Were you
I
good
played.
student?
I mean, I was in. I'm just not. I don't consider myself a musician. Didn't mean I didn't play music. I did. So I played music, and I was not a great athlete, but I enjoyed playing baseball and a little basketball and just for the fun of it, intramural kind of stuff.
Yeah. And would you say like anyone that you thought of, whether it's aunts or uncles or teachers, aside from your dad, were leading the way as far as putting ideas in your mind of what was possible for your life?
Uh, that's an interesting question because it never came about that way. My parents, my dad parents were older, and when I was born, and my mother kind of she could never understand why I worked so hard. It just didn't compute. What do you mean you work
Yeah.
at a company? Because her brothers and sisters all had some kind of little retail store, jewelry business. My uncle was a tailor. Another uncle had a music store. So it was all these small businesses, and so that's where most of the influence came from. Was from my mother's side of the family, and all these small entrepreneurial businesses. And
Hmm.
so I was around it all the time. So I grew up in retail. So I never really thought about what I was going to do. I worked in my brother's furniture store, my brother-in-law's furniture business for a while. And so I just grew into that and I learned what it took to make a retail business work. And I became
Yeah.
really proficient at it.
It's a fun business and a hard business. I grew up in the same business and it's tough and it's changed so dramatically with
Now,
e-commerce and
yeah,
it's just
technology,
crazy now.
yeah, but it's still the same thing. It's still,
Principles are still the same.
the different people want something that appeals to them, whether it's clothing or whatever it happens to be. And retailers' job, no matter whether it's online or in a bricks and mortar store, is to provide those products and services that they want.
Yeah. Interesting. So I have read you talk I've read things where you've talked about the 6 Ps:
Yes,
purpose, passion, persistence, patience, performance, and people. I love all of those. They all resonate in such different ways. Obviously, these are things that you've come about through work.
yeah.
But if you think about your childhood, Were any of these things on the radar? Like, was it important to you to have passion? What were you passionate about as far as purpose, performance? Like, where were you getting your juice when you were little? Well, I'm thinking about it because, like, this isn't meant to be anything other than just an observation. I'm looking and I'm like, okay, college, and thinking about the way that we're raising our kids, this turbo
I
kind
didn't
of,
have, it wasn't that way. It
right?
was,
That's what I mean. It's just different back then. It's not like you have to go to Harvard and this is your destiny. It's just,
I didn't have that. And I didn't have, I was not a great student. I had a couple of years of community college, never graduated. I worked. I started working when
yeah.
I was 13. And I loved it. And I loved going to my uncle's jewelry stores and I remember cleaning counters and anything just to be
Mhm.
busy and doing stuff. And my very first job was Bergman Luggage. Remember Bergman Luggage?
I remember Bergman luggage. Yeah.
Cleaning out a warehouse. I would say that I was undermotivated as a child. That I didn't find that until I was in my really find it until I was in my early 20s.
And what was the first time that you remember feeling like I got a little something, something, or I feel successful?
When I was 21 years old. Was working for my brother in his furniture store, and I got recruited by somebody to go run one of they had a couple stores, looking for somebody to run one of their stores in Salem, Oregon. And I moved to Salem, Oregon to manage a furniture store. And that's when I knew I had some skill sets. Now, it was the beginning of a long, long journey to developing more and more skill sets. And by the time I was in my mid 20s, I went, I, I was, was at a family business. I was working for other people and I got turned on to servant leadership and
Yeah.
Robert Greenleaf's work on the leader as servant. And was an unconscious competent. I always had a smile on my face, and I'm a people centric person. I've always been that way, never not been that I can
Right.
remember.
Well, I
Probably,
think you can be people centric. Like I consider myself like that. But then I read that you, in 1 month, wrote like 2,500 notes. There's things that you also did that are outlying behaviors that
yeah,
make people
they
feel
were people
seen that are incredible.
Yeah, they were people centric. I mean, I didn't figure that out for myself. I had a boss and that was a mentor, and he taught me about that, about how to do the little things. And so the things that I did were always trying to reinforce that. And as I learned more about servant leadership, I went from being an unconscious competent to a conscious competent. In other words, I understood it, I could teach it. And the birthday cards and anniversary cards, I used to send out about 10,000 of each a year, 20,000 cards a year when I was at Starbucks, all hand signed, notes and all of them. And I was just trying to get people to understand that I cared and that they were important. And it wasn't just about a job. It was bigger than a job. And so I did that until it got so big I couldn't do anymore. And then I signed it out to other people to do their own areas. I don't think it stuck, but
Well, the handwritten thing is it still stands out so much. I have a girlfriend who writes handwritten cards. Like we'll just hang out, and she's like, "Loved spending time together. Can't wait to see you soon." And it comes in the mail, and it's so nice.
yeah, it's
It
nice.
really, it's just, it is incredible. I love that. So, how old were you when you met your wife, Lynn?
Well, it was second marriage, so I was about 30 years old. So
Yeah.
we've been married. Well, let's see, was I 30? Well, we've been married. It'll be 48 years this June. So
Wow. So, okay, I'm dying to get into Starbucks, but I'm sure that every podcast and every interview has been largely focused on Starbucks. That original story of like how that opportunity came to you and what your first impressions were of the company.
well, I did not. I had just come out of being president of a land development company, and it was my first big job of being a COO of a company. And the company got in trouble. We had to sell it. And so I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I was in my early 40s. And I decided I'm going back to my roots. I'm going to go find a small business to buy. So I looked at a number of business, a couple of furniture stores. I looked at Hickory Farms franchise. I looked at a bunch of different things. And along the way, I had been talking with Jeff Brotman, who I know, and I was trying to come up with ideas that we could do together. And he was helping Howard Schultz out, and he was on the board of Starbucks, this little tiny coffee company. And he said, Howard could use a guy like you. And so I went and talked with Howard and sat down. We had breakfast, and he had a list of criteria. He was looking for a VP of operations. So when I first met Howard, there were like 11 stores. So VP of operations for 11 stores, not very big. And so we sat down, we were talking at breakfast, and he had a list of 10 criteria. Wanted somebody with a college degree. I didn't have that. Wanted somebody with a food service background. I didn't have that. Finally got down to number 10. Can I breathe? That was about it. That was the only thing I qualified for. And so we shook hands and parted ways. And I was continuing on my search to buy something. And finally, I found something to buy, and it happened to be a franchise. And I didn't have any money, so I had to go to my brother-in-law to ask him to help get some money, raise some capital. And he said, I don't know anything about franchising either, but there's a guy I know that knows a lot about franchising. His name was Jack Rogers. And Jack was kind of Howard's first investor when he bought Starbucks. And Jack had experience in franchising. He had Benihana, he had Red Robin, he had some McDonald's. And so we went to talk with Jack, and I'm pitching my heart out. And Jack said, what do you want to do that for? We need a guy like you right here. And I said, well, I've already been down that road before, and I don't think I fit. He said, we still haven't hired anybody, and you are absolutely perfect. I want you to talk to Howard again and somebody else again. And I did. And I said to Howard, I said, I went and talked with Howard. I said, look, before either one of us goes any further, how about if I work in the company for a week for free? There's no formal thing. I'd like to work on the trucks for 2 or 3 days. I'd like to work in the stores for 2 or 3 days. I'd like to work in the roasting plant for a couple of days. And I said, at the end of that week, let's get together and see if there's anything there. You look at me, I look at you. And at the end of that first week, I fell in love. And fortunately, Howard
Wow.
had an invitation for me to join, and the rest was kind of history. So I didn't know what it would become. In those days, I was just trying to do something I loved to do. And I was a coffee enthusiast, and I realized really early on that it wasn't about coffee, that it was about people. And that's what I brought to Starbucks, was that belief and that discipline to do that.
Well, anything and everything that anybody's read about Starbucks that includes you always covers that part, that is clearly the driver. But at the time, when you said he came with this list of 10, it's not like servant leader is like top of the
Oh, no,
list. It's
that
like
was
he doesn't even know what he doesn't know.
he didn't know. He didn't even know what those words meant.
Of
That's not,
course.
wasn't Howard. Yeah.
But what was your special sauce at the time outside of the people side? When you say, I want to spend a little time here, when I think of somebody who's strong operationally, I think of them as being very strong with process
Yeah.
and
I was a strong operator. I understood how P&Ls work. I knew how to hire and fire. I knew how to recruit. I knew how to do marketing. I was a retailer through and
hmm
through, and all facets of it. I've been around it since I was a young teenager. So I
hmm
watched them all doing everything, and then I had other experiences. I worked for Levitt's Furniture. I worked for a division of Gold Federated Department Stores outside of my family's business for a while. So I learned some bigger company skills, but I had these, and then I spent 10 years at a company called Grand Tree Furniture Rental, and I started the retail business in Grand Tree. I took it from basically one store to 60 stores to something that was losing money to something that was making money. So I had great experiences. And so when I got to Starbucks, I knew what a retail store was. I knew how to make it work. I knew that it was dependent upon people, and
hmm
that if you get that right, everything will work. So, and I understood how to manage the middle of a P&L, and how you get it to the bottom line, and how do you get the right people in the right jobs. So
Wow. And what was that first role when you said, hey, let's do this?
vice president of operations. So I had, at
Yeah.
that time, there were 28 stores. By the end of the first year, we had 50. In 3 years, we had 200. And before I left, I went from 28 to 15,000 stores when I retired.
Wow.
I was on the board
Wow.
for 12 years. But it all came about because of Jeff. And then I had a cousin, a guy named Huntsy Gorlick, who was an investor. And I had a bunch of friends that were investors in the early Starbucks days. So I knew people there, and they knew me. So I had good references, so to speak.
Right.
Uh,
Just on your character and what kind of person you are.
yeah, my references were in character. And
Yeah.
what I brought to Starbucks was the concepts of servant leadership, of how to build an organization, of how to develop a culture that cared about each other, that had a passion towards accomplishing something. And I just drove that home. I was relentless about it. I had a little
Yeah.
saying when I was trying to get people to understand what we were about, that we weren't in the coffee business serving people, but we were in the people business serving coffee. And
That's like my favorite saying about Starbucks. And I also read this, which totally stood out to me. You said the person who sweeps the floor should choose the broom. So like teach like at any level, there should be a thinking around empowerment and letting the
yeah,
people.
absolutely.
Yeah.
You hire great people, get them on board with the greater purpose of the organization, make sure they're aligned with the values of the organization, and let them loose. Get out of their way. And if they have an idea or they see something that needs to listen to them, don't just roll your eyes and say I'm busy. And so yeah, the
Are there
person should,
examples of good ideas coming from like a
oh,
barista?
biggest,
Great
biggest
ideas.
one, that person who sweeps the floor. We had a district manager in Southern California. Her name was Dina Campion. And Dina had this idea. She'd seen it at a competitor's store, and it was for a drink that we didn't have. And so I went down to visit her, and she showed me what she wanted to do, and I brought it back to Seattle, and I presented it to everybody. The head of marketing and product development at that time, a guy named George, and he said, "We're not going to do something like that. We're in the coffee business. We're not going to do this." So I called Dina up and I said, "No, we're not ready yet, but let's give it 6 months." So Dina and her broom, right? She was a district manager. She knew what customers wanted because they were coming in and asking. So but 3 weeks after I told her we weren't going to do it, she called me up again and said, Can you come visit again?" So I went down to visit her again, and I had to be down in Southern California where she was. And she gave me three little sample cups of the drink. And I said, "Well, how many do you think you could sell a day?" She said, "I think we could sell about 30 drinks a day per store." Well, we were only doing about $600,000 a year per store at the time. And that was going to be, they were selling for about $3. Well, that was about $100. It was about 700 a week, about 30, 40,000 a year in sales. That was going to be a 5% lift. And plus these drinks were full of ice. So it was going to be high margin. So I brought her up to Seattle and had her do it, present the product. And George got mad at me. And I looked at Howard and I said, "If this works, Howard, this is going to be a blowout." And I said, "Give me 90 days. So you know what it was, Dina and her broom? It was Frappuccino.
I knew you were going to say Frappuccino. I love a Frappuccino.
Created Frappuccino. It wasn't even our beverage. It was a competitor's kind of beverage. But we brought it in, made it our own, and, and, and we called it Frappuccino because we bought a company in Boston called Coffee Connection that had a product. Remember those old, you go into it where those spillover fountains that the orange juice or whatever it is. So they had a drink called Frappuccino, but it wasn't made like ours was. Theirs was pre-made, and then these big spillover things. We made everyone by hand. But we used that name and we blew it out. It became a $4 billion business.
That's so crazy.
All
Did
the
she
time,
end up coming to the corporate office or she stayed as a
oh,
regional
no,
manager?
she did. She ended up being what we called the funnel. So every new idea that came along, she would set it up and we, bring it to leadership, and we'd take a look at things to decide whether we wanted to experiment with it or not. We couldn't do everything
Yeah.
because you'd have anarchy, but with the things that we thought had merit, we could do. But that's what she did.
That's
So
amazing. And so how did the different products like launch in the international markets? Like what was there a process to like, let's like crawl, walk, run, start with coffee, or were they all always the same, no matter if you're in Tokyo or wherever you are in the world?
well, when we first opened up in another country, we went with what we knew. And then once we were there, we said, okay, what are the differences? What are customers asking for? So in Tokyo, for example, matcha, green tea, right? And so we created a matcha frappuccino, right? So we didn't have it here because there wasn't that big a market. Eventually, we brought it to some local Asian markets
Yeah.
in the United States, but in Japan, it was huge, right? And you remember, well, caramel wasn't. We didn't have caramel, but Japan, they love the caramel flavoring, and so we brought that to the States out of Japan. So things went back and forth, but we never said no. We just said we want to know about it. So
Yeah.
my job was,
I would call Frappuccino a huge success of like something that you could Dana contributed, but you contributed because you were open to hearing from
well,
her.
I broke the barriers down. I broke the
Yeah.
to let her do it.
Yeah.
I didn't tell you the full part of that story.
I want to hear.
We actually snuck Frappuccino in. We didn't tell when we were testing it. We didn't tell anybody. We just did it in her store. Didn't tell Howard. Didn't tell anybody. And so we were selling it. She actually sold 50 drinks 50 drinks a day per store. The first week, the third week, she was doing 70 drinks a day per store. It was just going to be a blowout
Yeah.
success.
That's
So
that's smart. Are there other
just gotta
examples
break
like
the rules.
that?
Oh, well, you got to be willing to break the rules. Well, you don't only get the samples of stuff that works, the stuff that didn't work. We had a product called Mazagran, which was our first bottled beverage. And we did all the research. It was a joint venture with Pepsi, and it was an abject failure. It didn't work. After it was out there, we spent 5 million getting ready to do it. And by the fifth week, we realized it wasn't going to work. And it wasn't going to work. So you have successes, you have failures. I don't think
Yeah.
anything's as big as Frappuccino, but there's been all sorts of things that you had to fight for. And I always believe I didn't like rules. I'm not a rule guy. I'm a recipe guy. And that what that means is in the rule book, it says you do this. In the recipe book, it says, well, here's the proportions, but you can change this. If you like carrot cake, but maybe you don't like carrots, right? That much. So you don't need to use a dozen carrots, you can use four. And so I was always looking, as long as it wasn't illegal, unethical, or immoral, and you weren't going to poison somebody, then why not try it in our kind of business? And so they had plenty of successes. Breakfast sandwiches came about because one of the people that reported to me thought we should put warming ovens in the stores. Well, we were just planning on warming the pastries that we had. We didn't have any way of warming them. And so we put those ovens and we tested it. And then he came up with the breakfast sandwiches because we could use the same ovens. And that was a blowout success. And
Oh
so
yeah.
it's those kind of
Huge.
things that happen. And that when you have people, listen to them. Listen and ask them questions. What do you like about Starbucks? What don't you like about Starbucks? What would you change about Starbucks? And then act. Here, Howard was the creative guy. I was the alchemist. I took disparate ideas because I heard it enough around in the field and the stores and the baristas and the store manager, and I'd pull them together and then I'd roll it out and say, "What do you think? Is this what you guys were thinking?" And then we'd take an action. We'd do something.
Yeah, and that creates so much trust and loyalty and engagement from
It
your
wasn't just about
employees, which spills over to your customers.
it wasn't about product. It wasn't just about product. That was some things, but a lot of things in operations and things to do for customers, putting customers' names on the cup, putting them on the cup, or going to the technology to put it on. Those were all came about through people in the stores.
Hmm. Speaking of culture, I found that as companies scale, it's always hard to hold on to that. How did you, what actual like measurable things did you do to hold on to the culture, even across just different countries and different actual cultures? I'm talking about your corporate culture, but like, how do you make it so that like this is a Starbucks person, this is what we want to hold on to, this is the experience we want?
It's you have to be relentless. So my job went to being into all the minutiae and the details about everything, to big and broad. My role was to make sure that everybody understood that we were about people number one and coffee number two, right? And if we got those two things right, everything would fall into place. Now, of course, it's much more complicated than that, but that was my job. It was to preach the story, to make sure that everybody understood that we were going to live or die by how we treated each other and how we treated those human beings we call customers. If we did that well and we had the products that they wanted, things would work out. And so I was relentless about that. And I didn't care. And I probably gave the same speech 10,000 times in different ways, different formats, but it was always about those two things and primarily about people. And I didn't care where I went in the world. I took that with me and I insisted that that's how we were going to be. Because the truth of the matter is, what I learned after opening all those stores in 54 countries, we're all the same. We all want to love and be loved. We all want to be treated with respect and dignity. We all want to grow as human beings. We all want more for ourselves and for our families. And everything else is commentary. What drink we make, if it's a matcha frappuccino or if it's a caramel frappuccino, it's still the same thing. It's serving people the things that they want. And so wherever we failed internationally, it was because we did everything with joint venture partners in the beginning. Okay. It was because the joint venture partner didn't understand it was all about the people. We did our best job of making sure we had the right partner, but sometimes you made a mistake. And the ones that didn't do well were the ones that took advantage of the people. The ones that did well were the ones that understood it was about the people. And so I just drove that home. That's what I'm known for, and I believed in it. So I was a true believer of dangerous, and I believed I was right, and I wasn't going to let go of it. And if it was difficult to get fired at Starbucks for missing your numbers. It was easy to get fired for messing with the people.
Yeah.
And so when you drive that home and you keep at it and at it and at it and at it, it becomes reality.
Yeah. And at what point did you guys decide to call everybody partners and to give everybody benefits?
Oh, it was really early on. Within the first 18 months that I was there, we changed to partners and we gave everybody benefits early on, gave everybody stock options even before, long before we were public, and everybody got health care benefits and on and on and on. And it was just how we wanted to operate. It was a values issue. I had three guys, a guy named Warren Smith, who's passed away. He was the third leg of the stool. They used to call us H2O. Well, and all three of us came from nothing. My parents were Depression era parents. The most my dad ever made was $18,000 a year. Howard's father was very similar in that way, came from nothing. Yeah, he was poor. I wasn't poor, but we didn't have much. And Orrin Smith was the same way. Came from a single mother, had a household, an alcoholic father who left the family. And so we three of us, we disagreed on about a lot of things, but we agreed on that one thing, that we are going to be inclusive. We're going to treat people with respect and dignity. There weren't going to be any company boats or cars or at that time airplanes, and so that's how we operated. And so part of those benefits, we're saying we wanted people to feel like they were part of it. We didn't want them to look at us walking down the hallway and say, there goes those people.
Hmm. And how were decisions made at that time? You talked about H2O. Was it like, hey, Howard Schultz, you're in this lane, Howard Behar, you're in this lane, or is it everything like how do decisions get made that are impacting the business?
We had lanes, but we crossed over. Howard particularly was crossing over all the time. I had to ship back out. Warren and I both were shoving him out. Say, that's my job, not yours.
Yeah.
But we had lanes. I was really the operator, and I had human resources that reported to me, and operations, and sales and operations. Howard had marketing and the public aspects of our business when we went public and raising the capital. And Orrin was a chief financial officer, and he had supply chain reporting to him, legal, and many of those things. But we had our lanes, and for the most part, we stayed in them. But we also worked together. We knew
Yeah.
each other was on the court at all times. You know.
That's great. Tell me about, you mentioned mentors and that you've been also a mentor for so many. What impact have mentors had on your career? And if somebody's listening and they're needing a mentor, hoping to find a mentor, what do you think that role can bring to somebody's career?
Well, I've been fortunate, knock on wood, Ken Horn, as they say, that I always had the right person show up at the right time, and they were there. And but I was awake. You know what I mean? I
Hmm.
said, hey, there's something here. I can learn from this person, and so I did. And I was curious, and I wanted to learn, and I'd ask questions all the time. And so I've had people all on the way, from family people in my family, to professionals that knew a lot more than I did, and wherever I was working. And when I was 27, I I hit a home run. A guy that hired me, and he became the most significant person in my life at that time. He is a guy that has a very bright side, right? A shining bright. He was the one who taught me about sending cards out. And he was the one that introduced me to servant leadership. He taught me about doing affirmations and setting goals and writing them down, and writing so many things that he exposed me to, and how to change my habits. There were so many things he taught me. And he also had a very dark side that I didn't want anything to do with. And I was able to sort through both of those. And he changed me. He got me to believe in myself. He's the one that really he turned on my accelerator. He turned on my engine, and I just ran with the things that I learned, and then I made them my own, and I added to them and subtracted from them. And so he was significant in my life. And even today I have people that are my mentors, that people that I know about. It's not about business so much anymore, but about life. But
Yeah.
and I ask, I'm curious, and I want to know what people think. And when you do that, then people are attracted to that, and they want to help you. I have never had anybody turn me down and say,
Have
well,
you ever cold called somebody to
yes,
pick their brain? And
oh yeah, all the
wow,
time. When I was the founding president of Starbucks International, I I'd always been a buy on the buy side, like your parents were buying from Asia, but I'd never been on the sell side, selling into another country. So I needed to have some knowledge. Well, I started calling around the people companies that I knew, and I got introduced. I'd asked, "Do you know this guy?" And somebody said, "Yeah, I do know him. Would you introduce me?" And so before I started, I talked to the guy that ran Yum Brands, which was Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken internationally. And I talked to him probably a dozen times. I used to say, tell me all the mistakes you made. What are all the things you did right? What would you change about what you did? And he taught me how to set up the contracts and what to do and what to beware of, and save the company tons and tons of resources. So they're always there. People are willing to help
I
if you
agree.
call them up.
I
You
agree.
I just had a call yesterday. I've got a hot button right now. It's this whole issue with DEI, and it's making me crazy.
What's your opinion about it?
What are people worried about? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Why wouldn't we want different people, kinds of people working in? Well, in order to get different kinds of people, it means you want them with different experiences. Well, people with different experiences come from different communities, and different communities can represent Hispanic communities, Muslim communities, Jewish communities, Black communities. Well, they get their experiences by the people that they associate with. So we want difference of people coming in, not because they're Black or they're green or yellow. It's because they bring different ideas and different ways of looking at solving problems. And so it's just a bunch of garbage that they're making a big deal out of this. The claim is, well, when you do that, you're excluding somebody. No, you're not. You're including everybody. And look at, you don't hire somebody because they're Black. You hire somebody that has great skill sets, but you may want somebody that has had a Black experience in the Black communities. What is wrong with that?
Yeah.
It's what we want to do. So this stuff is just baloney, and it's doing damage, and it's going to do damage. And it took us a long time to get to where we are. In a few short years, they're killing it. And we'll be
Yeah.
back at this again because you have to be. How many women that weren't, the glass ceiling is still alive, like it or not, right? With women
Yeah.
in senior positions. And so who are we kidding? If we really want it's to the benefit of society, because if everybody gets shots at it, it'll grow
Everybody lifts. Yeah.
it lifts everybody. And so
Yeah.
it's baloney.
Changing gears just a little bit. I know that it's such a common question to say, like, what advice would you give your younger self? And I read that you said figure yourself out earlier. But how? Because I find that these kids put so much pressure on themselves, and at least my kids are very driven and focused, and I'm kind of like, just go be a kid. When else in your life, in your 20s, go almost figure out what you don't want to do?
Yeah, I
But
think,
there's pressure, like, to figure it out so early.
well, I don't think you have to figure out what you're going to be so early. You're going to be a doctor or lawyer. Fine if you do, if you get turned on to something. I've seen young people get turned on. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a doctor with specificity. But most people are not like that. We don't do it. But I do believe that you should be early on, you should start working on who you are as a person. And the reason why is that when somebody says to you, gee, I don't like the color of your slacks, you got to be able to ask the question, so why don't you like the color of my slack? Somebody says, gee, you're awful emotional. I'd say, okay, so what don't you like about that? And why do you think I should change that? Because it served me. And so you need to know who you are and what you stand for. And that can start really early. I think you can start to do this work in probably grade school, even junior high school. So
Right. Well, some of those things that you started talking about, like habits, the things that you started talking about, like setting intentions and habits and the things that your mentor taught you, I agree. They don't teach these things in school,
no, they
and
don't.
they're so important.
Yeah. And so you're creating a life for yourself. So you ought to write down your 8 to 10 core values. These are things, hell or high water, this is what you're going to live. Now you can go online, you can find a list of words that represent human values, 300 different words. Well, you want to get it down to 8 to 10 core ones. That doesn't mean that there aren't 50 or 100 other words that could reflect you in some way or another. But then you want to take those words and you want to define them. So my first core value is honesty. Well, then I have to say, what does honesty mean to me? How will honesty influence my actions and decisions? Because honesty is just a word until you turn it into an action or a decision, right? And so what does honesty mean to me? Well, it means that somebody asks me a question, I'm going to give them my truth. It may not be their truth, but it's how I feel about something. But I'm willing to listen to them too. I'm not going to lie to somebody. The point being is that honesty is important. It was one of my important core value to me. So when you're in high school, you ought to start identifying what are the things that are important to you. What matters to you? Like I said, the key to life is living your life with intention. That means you got to do the work. You got to write down your values. You got to have 3 to 5 year goals or 1, 3, and 5 year goals written down across all aspects of your life: spirituality, material, economic well being, personal growth, your children, your marriage, your grandchildren, whatever it is, the headings, and have 3 or 4 different goals under each of those headings and that you're going to achieve. And you do your best to accomplish your goals. You're not always going to do it, but live your life with intention. Know who you are, know why you're here, and figure out what you want to do. Write it down. Otherwise, it's just wishes, hopes, and dreams.
Do you spend time, Howard, with your grandkids on this kind of stuff?
Sure, I spend my time with my kids on it, and
Yeah.
my life is built around it. I can't. I talk to them about it. I can't force them, and so, but I give them enough of experiences to show what I do, and I show that it works. And then so I have my 8 to 10 core values, and then I have my mission statements, which goes like this: every day to live my life every day, nurturing and inspiring the human spirit, beginning with myself first, and then for others. And I live my life by that. I have a document that I've carried around for 55, almost 55 years. And this is a picture of Howard in 50 words or less. Has
Oh, wow.
my mission statement on, my core values, and then my 6 Ps, which you talked about a little bit before. And I live my life by this. And before I go to bed every night, I look in the mirror and I really do this. I ask myself a question: Howard, how did you do today against this picture of Howard? And some days I do pretty well, some days I don't. And I have to be honest about my performance. That old adage, if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there.
Yeah.
You want to live your life with intention. And you're
Has the
never,
mission statement been the same
huh?
forever? Has the
No,
mission statement
no,
stayed?
no,
How
no.
often do you edit this document?
Well, this one I've had for over 30 years. I had ones that were less, they were more of just basic stuff, like I want to be one of the leading executives in the home furnishings industry. It wasn't, but this one I plagiarized from Starbucks, part of it, when we were doing this work. And I said, that's me. That's what I want to live my life for. I had been living my life like this, but I never had it defined as well as this did.
Yeah.
So I've stayed with it all these years, and I get the opportunity to do that. It's not big things, it's small things. Sometimes it's just picking up a piece of paper off the street, putting it in the garbage. That nurtures and inspires the human spirit. It nurtures and inspires my spirit. You know,
Yeah.
so, and so I just think that you don't want to be directionless in your life. And you're never too young to start this process, to start thinking about it with your kids. Honesty is always a big one in families, right? We're always there telling our kids, be honest with me and everything, we'll work everything out. And so um, I think they can start working on it early and start to think about it. Nothing's written in pen or indelible ink. It's all written in pencil. You can erase and add anything or subtract something anytime you want.
It's so good. It's super, super inspiring. How do you feel? I'm guessing because you have it written down on a piece of paper. Do you use a paper calendar or do you use a calendar on your like iPhone?
I do iPad, or
So you do your iPad.
I do that. Yeah,
And have you dabbled in AI at all?
just started.
It's crazy. And you talk about like picking talent, and I'm in the recruiting space. One of the concerns is that people will start to use AI to pattern match the job description with their resume. And you have to get really good at some of these softer skills that you're
Yeah.
talking about and drawing those out from people.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's really difficult. So in the interviewing process, look, I had other people that interviewed for specific skill sets, for accounting, for for architecture, whatever it happens to be. And I interviewed for the big operating skills in retail. But but I ask questions about themselves and about their family. So I always questions like, do you have a brother or sister? Well, most people do. And I'd say, so what does your brother like about you? What does your brother not like about you? How about your sister? What do your parents wish you would have become versus what you've become? Right? What's the biggest argument you ever had with another human being? And what happened? How did it get solved? How did it solve? Did it solve itself, or what happened? What was the biggest argument you had with your parents? Who has been the biggest disappointment in your life? How about who is a friend that you thought was a really friend that wasn't, and what happened to that friendship? So I want to know how they respond. It wasn't the answer so much. I was looking, could they expose themselves? Could they be vulnerable and authentic? Did they know themselves at all? Because that's what I was looking for, because those were the keys to being a people centric person. If you
These
can't,
these are incredible. I've been interviewing for 30 years. I've been in recruiting, but I've asked a few of those.
yeah.
But a few of those are really good. They're all really good, and I'm going to steal them.
My favorite one is I have a magic wand. You're lucky I brought my wand with me today, and I'm going to wave it over your head. And tomorrow morning you wake up and you're doing whatever you want to do with your life, making all the money you ever dreamed of making. What would you do with your life?
So good.
I wanted to know what they would do with their lives and what it meant. And I could smell bullshit a mile away, right? Because after a while, when you hear
Yeah.
it. And so that's what I was looking for. And that's it. And if I got that right, then they fit in the organization. And I made plenty of mistakes along the way, but for the most part, it worked.
Yeah. And where do you think directionally things are going with leadership? There's been a ton of talk around servant leadership, but
Mm.
like the future of business, the future of leadership, especially as AI is really moving so quickly.
Relationships, I don't see that going away
I don't either.
unless we're going to all become Robotrons. I don't know, but who knows? I don't know, but I think people are ignoring it. And I don't see that our national political climate is allowing for servant leadership. I think it's totally manipulative and not kind of leadership. And I believe that great leadership. There's three responsibilities that a leader has, as far as I'm concerned, in the servant leadership model. Number one, help your people grow as human beings. Help them become better human beings. Number two, help them grow as professionals so that they can be all they can be. And when they leave your organization, they carry that on with them. And number three, help them achieve their goals. And that means you have to ask questions. What are your goals? Where are you trying to go? And then your job is to help them achieve their goals. So it's one, help them grow as human beings. Number two, help them grow as professionals. Number three, help them achieve their goals in life. And that's your job as a leader. And when you get that right, they're going to want to work their butt off for you and your organization. And if you get that wrong, then all you are is a manipulator, trying to get the most out of somebody without caring about them. And people want to know that you care.
Yeah. It's easier when you're not publicly traded, you don't have investors, and there's the pressures of profitability. An example is I'm super proud of our culture. Like at my company, we spend a ton of money and we don't really lose people too often. It's a very sticky environment.
Yeah,
But I realize that people are like, wow, you're spending so much money. What's the purpose of it on team building stuff or outings or just different things that I like to do?
yeah,
I guess that I see it as, or even just increasing the cost of the benefits
yeah.
that we're paying and making sure that they're the best. I guess I see it as that's just how I want to be as a leader. And I'm
Well,
okay making less money.
yeah, but
But the question is, what would happen if I didn't?
as long as you're honest with your shareholders, here's what we're doing. Look at probably one of the Starbucks is a great example of the cost of healthcare benefits. We were the first company to give same-sex partner benefits, right? It, and even the unions didn't have that, right? And we did it. Nobody asked us what it came up and we were talking about. We said, why wouldn't we do that? And look at Costco, Jim Senegal, right? When the shareholder said reduce your compensation, he said, if you don't like the stock, sell it. Now, you have to produce in order to make that work. You can't, you have to get the results that you say you're going to get. You can't, that doesn't mean you can't miss them, but now and then, but you
Yeah.
got to be honest with the people. But but you got to live up to your values because that drives the organization. If you don't do that, then why would anybody in your organization trust you? And if you're not there to serve your own people first, who are you there to serve? They're the
Yeah.
ones that have to serve your customers, and that's what
Yeah.
makes it work. And so I don't subscribe to that belief that look, the idea isn't to maximize profits, it's to optimize. And optimization means that you understand that you have different constituencies that need different things at different times. And if you're building an organization for the long term, then you want to take care of people and keep the good ones around.
Well, Starbucks is an example of a company that does such a great job. And I know that you've done work outside of Starbucks. You've written a couple books. You've done so much keynote speaking. Are there any that stand out to you of the speeches that you've given that are like, this was like, I was on a high after that one?
My wife says, Howard, this is what she says about me. She says, you can get out of bed and be on a podcast in 1 minute out of bed, and your energy goes from 0 to 1,000 miles an hour that quickly. And I love this. Look, because it gives me an opportunity to talk about the things that I really think are important in life. See, servant leadership is not a leadership model, it's a life model. That's an
Yeah.
important thing to recognize. It's a way you want to live your life. The same principles that hold true in servant leadership at work hold true at home. They're no different. And you show love to your people, not in the same way we love our kids, so to speak, but you love your people because they're human beings and they're worthy of love and respect, just because they're a human being. And so you ask about,
I
I
was
like to
I was
have,
asking about like when you give speeches and you're a keynote,
yeah.
are there any that you just get clearly? I think you're maybe saying you're an extrovert, you get energy from these types
Yeah.
of things. Are there any that you were like kind of like riding really high from?
Yeah, the ones that I like the best are when I get the audience really involved. So I don't do any speeches anymore because I got tired of looking at people out in the audience making not just talking to each other, going to sleep or whatever it is. I said that all that told me is that I wasn't being relevant to what their needs were. And so I insist now that I do just what we're doing. So I may go out and do 15 minutes of presentation and an hour of open mic communication, talking back and forth and communicating and clarifying that gets me excited.
I completely agree. And I think it gets a better result. Like
Oh,
just coming in and having a roundtable discussion is way cooler to me than talking at people and having them hoping that, especially nowadays, everybody's like you said, they're on their phones. It takes a lot to get people to be engaged.
yeah. I love to do high school students. I really love it.
Oh, that's
I
awesome.
do a lot of high school students. I do a lot of college students, and I love to do that because it I learned so much by the questions they ask.
This half the time, because I speak to high school students too, half the time they don't, they'll come up to you after and ask, but there's
Oh,
that
I
whole
push.
like camouflaging. I'll say, come to the front, and they'll point at them and ask them to say something. And then they do, but it takes a lot to get them to speak up.
You got to be pushy and you got to go up and cajole them. And I always take a half a dozen Starbucks aprons that say it's not about the coffee on them, and I say the first 6 questions get one of these aprons.
Ah,
It's
I love that.
I get the ball rolling and stuff, but people just need to be encouraged. They're scared, right? They are afraid. They don't want to appear dumb or they don't, all those
Yeah, of
things
course.
that we go through that are garbage. But I always say, turn your fears into faith. Ask me any question you want. There are no rules here, no rules. And nothing you're going to ask me or say to me will hurt my feelings or embarrass me. So have at. What do you want to know? And I get some real
That's
tough
so
ideas
generous.
furnished.
Tell me about people that you're mentoring. Like, is it a formal kind of like they've asked you, have you been cold called to be like, will you be my mentor?
Oh yeah, I do. I don't take very many anymore because uh, I I find that you have to be focused on them. If I always give my like will do before we get off, I'll give my cell phone number and my email address, and I return everybody's call and I'll or email. I not. That's a rule that I have in my life. I don't I don't ignore anybody. And if they want to talk about their boss, they want to talk about their work environment. I don't care what it is they want to talk about. I'm willing to talk about. So I do a ton of that.
Where's the gap filled? Tell me about how that gap has been filled at Starbucks, because I know that they've had lots of bumps in the road and different.
Well,
Who's filling those shoes now?
I don't know. A new CEO, I think, is very good. Ryan Nickel, I think he's really good, and he's got the right sense and the right feeling for that. So, and there's this DNA in Starbucks that has that. Is it perfect? No, long ways from perfect. But for the most part, leadership is held accountable by the people in the organization for what they've committed to doing. And so I see that, and I think it's there. I had my own personality and my own drive for that, but I still do it. Believe it or not, a lot of the calls I get are from district managers or regional vice
I
presidents.
was thinking that. I was just thinking that as I brought that up.
I get a
That's
ton. I
crazy.
just did two this week.
That's
And
amazing.
so they still call and knock on my door. And I've been gone for 14 years. There's still
Yeah,
people who have the birthday and anniversary cards,
of
believe it
course.
or not. And they never forgot them. They've kept them all these years. So those things, and it's
That's
amazing
got to
how
feel
the
good.
little things matter. So I never turn down anybody. I never turn down anybody from Starbucks. I find time. I never did when I was working, and I was a lot busier then. But
Yeah.
there's always time. I can always find some amount of time. And sometimes I have to be clear. I've got 5 minutes. Let's talk. You know,
Yeah, super inspiring. I'm curious how you have any free time and what you do with it. How do you relax? And how do you, like you said, your wife is like, okay, I'll just turn it up right when he gets on the podcast. How do you turn it down?
I love being with my wife. We've been together 48 years. We share a lot. She's a social worker, an oncology social worker, and so we share a lot. We like to we travel quite a bit. I'm going to the Philippines for 2 weeks to give a speech to the Starbucks people, then spending a week on vacation. I have two little Havanese dogs that fill my soul, and my grandkids. Fun being around them. Two of them are going to graduate from college this year, and watching them go, and I get to do this.
Yeah,
Geez, for me, it can't be any better than this. It's hard to explain. I am so committed to my work and to what I believe in that when I get an opportunity to talk about it, and if I could influence one person to think differently about their lives, to think differently about how they make decisions in their lives, of how they figure out who they are, because there's nothing better than be able to put your hat on the morning and wear it throughout your whole day. Whether you're married, you shouldn't have to look across the bed and say, "Oh, I better put on my spouse hat," or come to work at Starbucks and say, "Oh, I better put on my Starbucks hat," or whatever it happens to be. You ought to be able to wear Howard's hat at home, at work, with your friends, whatever it be you. And that's the key to all this is being able to do that. So I want people to have a fulfilling life.
authenticity of it.
That's a way.
Why do you think, Howard, that so many incredible companies have come out of this area in Seattle? It's just unbelievable.
I think it's a lot of our culture. The Swedes, the Norwegians, the all the immigrants that came. We were late to bloom. There's this kind of if you make a mistake in Seattle, if the business goes under, you're still going to all the same parties, right? Nobody says, "Well, you're a bum," unless you were dishonest, you know. But I think there's just this gentleness about Seattle. It wasn't until about 10 years ago that people started honking their horns, and you still hardly ever hear them. You
Yeah.
get at a stoplight, you've experienced this, and it goes through the stoplight, and there's four cars behind you. Nobody honked their horn. You know? And now there's more people honking, but I think
Yeah.
that's just part of the Seattle DNA.
Just the good people, and there's so
Yeah.
much innovation and creativity too. It's been unbelievable to see.
Well, when you allow people to make mistakes and blow it, then there's going to be more innovation.
Yeah.
And if you treat people with respect, Seattle, we have meetings to have meetings. And the downside of Seattle is it's hard to sometimes get things done.
People are more passive. Yeah.
More passive, but I think that's part of it. And you look around, you look at it, and particularly in the consumer segment, right? From Nordstrom to Costco to, you know,
Yeah. It's just been unbelievable to see. And I love to talk to people who are kind of like I'd call you like some of the OGs that are part of the foundation of our city. It's just been incredible to watch your career and so awesome to have you on the podcast. So I think I know the answer to this, but what's the ultimate fuel for you? What fuels you?
The ultimate fuel is people. I was the leadership chair at the University of Washington for a year. I loved because it was great being around all those professors. And I was a chair of the University of Washington Foundation. It's all people centric and talking with donors and it's people. It's serving others. Look, there is nothing that any of us will do in our lives that isn't about serving another human being. You may think it's not, but it is. And it's our job as human beings to figure out what that connection is. So whether you're a doctor, lawyer, fire chief, engineer, barista, it doesn't make any difference what you are. There's only one job we have, and that's to serve people in some way or another. And even if you're a lowly widget maker that makes widgets, go into a printing press, it gets sold to a publishing company, it produces a magazine or newspaper that gets delivered to somebody's home to inform or entertain them. The lowly widget maker is about serving people. And the key is in any organization is get everybody to understand what role they play in serving others. You never burn out when you're serving others. You may get tired. We all get tired, but you'll never burn out if you're serving others because it's re-energizing all the time. There's this constant feedback loop, right? And that's what I get. I get this constant feedback loop.
Well, you're a bright light. You have so much good energy and good juju. I could talk to you all day, and I'm super grateful for your time. I feel inspired. I took notes, which is great. I may, if you're okay. So you said you're going to give the email and cell phone. Are you serious?
Yes, I want to do that. Let's do it right now. So my email address is my initials, hb@howardbehar.com. So my initials and my name. And my cell phone number is 206-972-7776. I'm slow sometimes to get back. I will always get back to you.
That's incredible.
We can talk about anything you want to talk about.
Our listeners are lucky. This is great. Thank you so much. Super grateful.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. If you'd like to check out past episodes to hear from more business leaders, go to fueltalent.com/podcast. And if you have a minute, please leave a review and rating on your favorite podcast app, or share this episode with a friend or colleague. Please share any feedback or interview suggestions for other guests by sending a message to podcast@fueltalent.com. I'm Shauna Swerland, and thanks again for listening.